A lot of you may have heard of a company called TurboTax. They completely revolutionized the dreaded idea of filing taxes from filling out a complicated form like this to something as simple as this. As we can see here, TurboTax made the process of filing taxes much more easier and user-friendly, and that's exactly what I want to do, except not with taxes. Hello everyone, my name is Anoushka Lewis, and this year I'm a junior and I'm in ISM 1. I'm studying experience design and I'm so grateful to be in the ISM program as it has given me the opportunity to not only explore my interests within experience design, but to also gain real world experiences and build connections with professionals. So I know a lot of you may be asking the question, well, what is experience design? So experience design or UX design is all about providing meaningful human-centered experiences and interactions. This involves the process of design thinking and providing a human-centered approach in order to meet user needs. Moving on to the different phases within my ISM journey, the first phase was primary research. And within this phase, I got to interview different professionals within the field of experience design, and I got to learn more about their perspective and their roles within this field. So my first interview that I had was with Andrea Sutton, and she's the Vice President of Design and Technology at AT&T. So the first thing that we looked at was what makes up a good design. So we discussed two components of a good design. The first being ensuring that the design increases the user's productivity as well as increases their happiness. We also discussed the concept of redesigning data. And so for this, Ms. Sutton provided me an example of how her and her team designed an app for AT&T truck drivers to help them easily locate their truck and their equipment without having to scroll through a bunch of different lists to find that information. So through this example, I learned that a UX design project doesn't necessarily have to build new software. Instead, it can re-visualize existing data. Now, my second interview was with Laura Becker, and she is a senior UX designer at Zemo Technologies. So during this interview, I really want to highlight our discussion on usability testing. So Ms. Becker provided me with several different methods and tools in order to conduct usability testing. And so she mentioned different methods such as guerrilla testing, using usability testing labs, and quick testing. And she also mentioned different tools such as using online tools such as Morave and other using testing websites, or even just using a simple spreadsheet in order to help conduct this process. My third interview was with Lena Kwa, and she's an experience design researcher at Capital One. So during this interview, she really emphasized the importance of using critical skills such as storytelling and empathy in order to help solve for a customer's pain points. She also mentioned her experience of working on the Capital One Auto Navigator app. And so through this, I really got to understand the implication of the design process within a real setting. My fourth interview was with John Keys, and he's an experience design director at Project 202. So during this interview, we discussed different methods to process data, such as looking at contextual inquiries, using affinity diagrams, and then also just looking at the importance of qualitative and quantitative data within user research and the testing process. We also looked at specialization in terms of the different roles within UX design. And so through this, we really looked at the importance of having a UX triangle. And so this involves different roles such as a designer, a business analyst, as well as a developer, and how all these roles work together throughout the process of initial findings to the testing process. My last and final interview was with Sassini Nasir, and he is an educator and director of the ArtSci Lab at the University of Texas at Dallas, or UTD. So during this interview, we really focused on the difference between interaction design and experience design. So I learned that interaction design is all about looking at the dialogue between a user and a product. So really looking at how the user interacts with the product rather than the experience the user is having. We also looked at the importance of designing for different scenarios. So for this, Mr. Nasir provided me with an example of how he and his team conducted usability testing for Toyota. So what they did was they looked at nearly 30 different scenarios of the future of in-car experience. And so through this, I learned that it's really important within experience design to think through different scenarios and really tell stories to users. Now moving on to the second phase within my ISM journey, this phase was secondary research. So this is all about learning more about the process of design thinking and the different steps in between. So as we can see here displayed on this slide are the 5 different steps within the design thinking process. These steps are really flexible based on the project that you're working on. However, for my research, I really focused on the on the steps of empathizing and user research, prototyping, as well as testing. So the first step that I focused on was user research, and so I really focused on 3 different methods to help conduct user research. The first method that I focused on was contextual inquiry. So this is all about observing users in their natural setting. And I actually used this in creating my final product as I was able to observe users in their natural setting and just really focus on the different steps that they take in order to complete a process. I also looked at stakeholder interviews. So this is all about interviewing with different people involved within the design process, such as interviewing with designers, researchers, business analysts, employees, and several other people. And so this is also something that I use in terms of creating my final product and being able to interview employees and get their perspective along with the perspective of users. Now, the last and final method that I looked at was affinity diagramming, and this is displayed right here on the screen. So as we can see here, there are several different sticky notes that are color-coded in terms of each participant. And so each sticky note includes an idea or thought or, a quote that a participant mentioned. And so all of this is really helpful in terms of recognizing the relationships and the different patterns within the data. And so affinity diagrams are really helpful in terms of organizing all the patterns and really helpful in terms of generating different solutions and findings. So through prototyping, I learned that essentially creating a prototype is ensuring that it aligns with your final product and that it resembles it and making sure that it enhances the usability for users. So through prototyping, I learned the process of iterative prototyping. So this is just rapid iteration prototyping, and it's this constant cycle of prototyping and testing with users and getting their feedback and then implementing their feedback to make changes and essentially better your prototype and better the user experience of your prototype. I also learned about the difference between a low fidelity prototype and a high fidelity prototype. So through this, I learned that a low fidelity prototype is essentially just mainly focused on the content and visualizing your ideas and really focused on the flow of the design rather than being focused on all the technical issues. So with a low fidelity prototype, the best way to go about it is essentially just use pen and paper and visualize your idea, test your visualization with users in order to get real-time feedback and make changes as you go. In comparison, a high fidelity prototype still includes the importance of focusing on the workflow and the process and the usability, but it also includes the component of visual design, so adding things like animations and different components to increase the interactivity of your prototype. And the best way to do this is use various different software that's out there, such as Adobe XD or Sketch or InVision. So for usability testing, I looked at several different methods in order to help conduct this process. So as I mentioned earlier, I looked at rapid iteration testing, and so this constant cycle of testing and then prototyping in order to constantly get feedback and improve your prototype. I also looked at using a usability lab. So a usability lab is really efficient in the design process. And so essentially what this is there are 2 separate rooms, one for the users and one for the testers, designers, and researchers. And so for the users in their room, they're essentially working with a prototype in order to create a series of tasks that just help ensure that they're able to use the prototype and ensure that the prototype is user-friendly. In the separate room for testers and researchers, this is where they can essentially observe the behavior of the user and ask the question, well, was the user able to complete the task? And validations are all about being able to evaluate and confirm your user data and essentially create findings. So now moving on to my third phase, which was original work. So the original work process was all about combining my primary research and my secondary research, and essentially combining them together into some type of project or report in order to display my new understanding and knowledge about the field of experience design. For my original work, I created a research paper. And so this diagram here just helps to display the objective and the different components within my research paper. So throughout my secondary and primary research, and in this research paper, I analyzed the impact of different design trends such as artificial intelligence, voice design, ethics, and data visualization on current design methods such as prototyping, user research, testing, and sketching and wireframing. And so through this, I was really able to analyze the integration of technology within design and how specific methodology might change or adapt over time. So diving deeper in my original work process, in terms of the resources that I use, I first started off by researching design methods and the basic structure of the design thinking process through reading different design-related articles and books. And then from there, I continued on with my research, but this time through my informational interviews with professionals, where I was able to learn more about the design trends. So, in terms of my higher application, my original work contributes to the understanding of how these various design trends can impact a designer's day to day tasks. And I also learned about the various different design trends and methods that I might want to include in my own project. Moving on to my mentor. So I confirmed my mentor towards the end of first semester and during the process of finalizing my original work. So my mentor is Lena Kwa, and she is an experienced design researcher at Capital One. And so I actually found out that she was a speaker at a big design conference. And so from there, I was able to connect with her via LinkedIn and just talk to her more during our interview. So now moving on to our mentor experiences. So during our mentor visits, they've been really helpful in terms of allowing me to develop critical design skills by allowing me to better understand the different methods within the design thinking process. And so Ms. Kwa has been really good about providing me with real world and physical examples in order to help me just visualize all the concepts that I've been reading and learning about. She's also been really good, especially these last few weeks, in terms of creating my final product and the prototyping process, in terms of providing me with valuable feedback and assisting me throughout the process by going through the different findings and my testing data with me in order to help me understand the different patterns that I see and what this means for my overall project. And also just providing me with several different suggestions in order to just help improve my prototype. And my most memorable mentor visit was when I got to visit the Capital One campus. So this was really great because I got to meet everyone there and I got to see the physical design space. I was also able to sit in on an affinity diagramming session. And so this is really cool because I was able to learn about the different steps and the process that I would take in terms of creating my own affinity diagram within my own project. Overall, I'm so glad to have had Ms. Kwa as my mentor this year. She's been really great in terms of encouraging me to ask more questions and continuing to challenge me in order to help me develop fundamental skills, not only in order to help me develop fundamental skills in design and life in general. I've also been meeting monthly with John Keith, and he is an experienced director at Project 202. And so during our mentor visits, he's been really good in terms of helping me better understand the different steps within the design thinking process and the different methods used within each step. So for example, with user research, he emphasized the importance of creating a journey map and a sentiment map in order to help visualize the different steps that a user takes within a process and how a user feels along each of those steps. And we've also talked about, in terms of prototyping, creating some sort of priority matrix or spectrum analysis in order to just help prioritize and identify the specific problem that I want to solve. Overall, our mentor visits have been really good in terms of allowing me to gain valuable feedback, and also I've been able to understand the different roles within an experienced designer and experienced researcher and how to balance both of those roles. So I'm really grateful to Mr. Keith for taking the time out of his schedule to meet with me monthly, for continuing to provide me with different feedback and tools, such as different articles to read, different tools to use, and for also allowing me to understand how experience design works with several different technologies. So now moving on to my final product, which I've spent nearly this entire semester working on. So for my final product, I created an online prototype for a new and improved driver's license experience. This aids all DPS customers in preparing for their visit by allowing users to upload and verify documents right from the comfort of their own home. So in terms of identifying the problem statement and the specific problem that I wanted to work on, I conducted research interviews with both users and DPS employees in order to help understand each of their perspectives and the different problems that they face within their DPS experience. So for users, a lot of users are uncertain of what documents are required, and as a result of this, they're forced to have repeat visits to the DPS and spend a lot of time waiting there. And for DPS employees, it's really hard for them to manage a heavy workload and also balance this with a large customer flow. Now moving on to the process. So now moving on to the process of design thinking and the process that I used in terms of my own project. So even prior to user research, I started off by really asking the question, what can I solve for? So I interviewed my family and friends just to figure out what issues they've had and what experiences they've gone through. And so through that and through conducting my own research, I was able I was able to generate around four to five different ideas. And so from there, I actually created a priority matrix. And so this just really helped me organize all my ideas based on the urgency and the importance of those ideas. And so through creating this priority matrix, I was able to identify that DPS, so solving for criteria. And so now moving on to the phase of user research, I started off by conducting interviews with users as well as DPS employees. And so in conducting both these interviews, I was able to just get a better understanding of both of their perspectives. And so through conducting these interviews, I took all my data and I created an affinity diagram, as you can see here on the slide. And so in creating my affinity diagram, I was able to identify the different patterns within my data. And so I was really able to see that a lot of users face major issues with documentation, the get in line online feature, and the lack of availability of appointments. And they also face issues in terms of the amount of time they spend waiting at the DPS and the lack of efficiency there. And I also discovered that DPS employees have a lot of issues in terms of repeat visits and the large customer flow. And so just being able to tackle all those problems will be very beneficial to them. And so from my process of creating an affinity diagram, I essentially took all these things and I identified different findings. And so some of these findings include the problem statements that I mentioned earlier of how users are uncertain of what documents are required, and as a result, they have to make multiple trips to the DPS. I also discovered that users need a sense of increased efficiency. So I also created how might we statements that help me identify these issues and help me generate ideas based off of that. And so some of the how might we statements include that users need a way to be more efficient, and they also need a way in order to increase customer satisfaction. And then I also created how might we statements and findings for the DPS employees. And through that, I found that the DPS employees are not able to manage the customer flow and the heavy workload that they balance. And so they really need a way in order to address issues such as repeat visits and provide solutions that meet the needs of all users. So from my findings in user research and inferences report, I moved on to the next phase, which is prototyping. So I started off this phase by ideating. So I used the Crazy Eights method and I began to create various ideations. So as you can see in wireframes, I began to just ideate and come up with a bunch of different solutions to help solve the how might we statements that I mentioned earlier. And so then from these solutions, I picked my top three solutions. So my top three solutions included the documentation idea, so allowing users to upload and verify their documents online and get real-time feedback, so that way they don't have this uncertainty and they don't waste time at the DPS. And my second solution was allowing users to book appointments months in advance. So that way they can find appointments. So that way they can find appointments that tailor best to their schedule rather than having to book an appointment the day of. And my last and final solution was creating self-service kiosks that would allow users who choose to come to the DPS for online services such as renewing the driver's license, so that way they can use these kiosks rather than spending time waiting in line at the DPS. Using these three ideas, I was able to I was able to conduct user testing. Using these three ideas, I was able to conduct user testing with around 4 different users. And during these tests, I asked each user to stack rank each idea based on which one they feel would save them the most time. And so all users emphasized the fact that the documentation idea, allowing them to upload and verify their documents prior to heading into the DPS, would allow them to save the most time. So because of this, I chose this as my final idea that I wanted to move forward with. And so then I ended up going into more, and so then I ended up finishing up the prototyping process by creating wireframes. As you can see here on the screen, I began to just create low fidelity wireframes that really just helped me visualize the idea, visualize the different steps that users would take, and also help me just question different aspects of my idea, such as improving the security of my idea and also improving the workflow of my idea. And so then I lastly moved on to the final phase. I essentially conducted usability tests with around 5 different users, and so I continued the process of rapid iteration testing. So I continued to work on my prototype, finalize my prototype, test and then essentially make changes based on the feedback that I got. And so this is really beneficial to me in terms of gaining beneficial feedback from my participants. And I figured that a lot of participants really wanted the security of my prototype to be improved. A lot of participants wanted the visual design aspects of my prototype to be improved. And a lot of participants were looking for something, and a lot of participants felt that the usability of my prototype, such as the amount of clicks that they'd have to go through, essentially needed to be improved. So for the testing process, I created a low fidelity and a high fidelity prototype. And so for my fidelity, so I created my low fidelity prototype using Adobe XD, and a it's essentially just a workable model. And it's essentially just a working model that goes through the content and workflow of my design without really focusing on the visual design aspects. And so one thing that I actually learned within the testing process was next time I should use paper and pen and visualize on that rather than going straight to software. So that way I can really focus on making changes without having to worry about other technical aspects. And then lastly, I created a high fidelity prototype. And so this is the prototype that you can see on the screen. This prototype really focuses on both the visual design as well as the usability. And I was able to really take all the user feedback that I gained and really work on my prototype in order to create my high fidelity finished prototype. And so I'm now going to play a video for you that just helps go through and demonstrate my prototype. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Overall, throughout this entire process, I've learned a lot more about experience design, and I've learned a lot about the different roles of a visual designer and design researcher. And I've also learned how to develop the critical design skills of focusing, flaring, building empathy, and learning how to balance innovation with user needs. Overall, I've also learned how to ask questions without any bias and how to take constructive criticism, especially from user feedback throughout the testing and prototyping process, and really turn it into something that is extremely valuable. Thomas A. Edison once said these wise words: "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." And these words represent the continuous hard work and dedication that I've put into my ISM journey this year and that I will continue to put into my future career. ISM has taught me a lot about professionalism, taking initiative, and building connections, and overall just putting myself out there. I will continue to use these skills of communication, organization, and hard work throughout my future career. Throughout this ISM journey, I've been grateful enough to have a large support system. So I want to say thank you to my mentors, Lena Kwa and John Keith, for continuing to assist me in any way possible and for taking the time out of their schedules in order to help me learn more about the field of experience design. You guys have inspired me so much, and I'm so appreciative of, of your time and consideration in helping me out throughout this journey. I also want to thank Coach Goff for giving me this amazing opportunity and for continuing to challenge me in so many new ways. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank my family and friends for always supporting me no matter what and for making a positive impact on my future career. In the end, UX design is an ever evolving field, and I'm so excited to see all the amazing things that I can accomplish and learn through this journey. Just like TurboTax, I want to be able to revolutionize and make things easier for people. Thank you. And also, this is my works cited page for all of the images that are not mine.